Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another edition of Hilaal Live. I'm your host, Luqmaan Shadrach, live from our Cape Town studios. It's Mental Health Mondays, and we've invited clinical psychologist Rafiq Lockhat back in studio. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome.
Alaikum salam. Delighted to be here, as always.
Jazakallah so much. And we encourage our viewers, if you'd like to be part of the show, you're more than welcome once you pick up various topics that you would like to chat to us about. You're welcome to email me at luqmaan@hilaal.tv. Or if you have any questions with regards to today's topic. Now, tonight's topic is the one of grief. And each journey, as we know, is extremely unique. Through stories and maybe expert insights, we explore healing, understanding, and growth after loss. Rafiq, I think it's such a pertinent topic to discuss around this time of the year because, we've been through a tough year. People have lost so many things, not just loved ones. They've lost jobs. They've lost, they've been through various challenges. But let's talk the one about grief, and especially when we lose someone as well. In your professional opinion, maybe chat to us about exactly what grief is.
Okay. So there are different kinds of losses.
Mm-hmm.
For our purposes today, we're going to focus on the loss of a loved one.
Right.
There are many kinds of losses: relationship losses, job losses, limb losses, transferring out other countries. So those are all for loss of your business. But for this, we're going to focus on the passing away of a loved one.
Right.
And I had very little interest in this topic many years ago. It was like a small part of my training, and then I went on to work, and then I ended up at Lentegeur Hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked with an amazing psychologist called Dr. George Savage, and he had a special interest in grief.
Okay.
1988, 89, and he had a special grief ward.
Oh.
Where people came in because they were suffering from what we then called complicated grief. And they'd get admitted to the clinic because they were unable to get over the passing away of a parent, a sibling, a child, whatever.
Okay.
And so that's when I started to learn, hang on, this is more complicated than I learned in my training.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how my interest started in it. And then I realized an important thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's the one thing all of us are going to have to deal with.
True.
At some point in our lives. If we don't go first, at some point in our lives, we're going to have to deal with the passing away of a loved one. So you can avoid paying your taxes, but really the one thing that we're not ever going to avoid is having to confront the death of a loved one. So it's a serious topic because not, as we spoke about, that not everybody will get depressed.
Yeah.
It's a percentage. Not everybody will get PTSD or anxiety or phobia or ADHD. But almost guaranteed, without a doubt, everyone at some point is going to be touched by the loss of a loved one.
Do you find, to a large extent, people tend to, become a bit of a recluse or avoid relationships, avoid family ties to try and avoid grief?
That can happen in some cases, and we'll look at when that happens, how, and also look. So our Mental Health Mondays is about imparting knowledge.
Right.
And it's about making mental health simple. Okay. So we're definitely going to talk about, so is one going to suffer the pain of grief forever? The answer is unequivocally no.
Of course.
We will talk about how to go from the intense pain that one suffers after loss to what we call normal sadness, which heals with time.
Okay.
So I think the first important thing is, step one is everybody's going to go through the grieving process at some point. Now, people often say to me, what's the difference between grief and mourning?
Yeah, because it's very similar. I mean, in terms
Right.
of, the emotions that one, spits out.
Right.
Yeah.
So in general, grief is the emotional processing and response to the death of a loved one.
Okay.
Mourning is the outward expression of it.
I see.
All cultures have mourning rituals.
Mm.
And they're very specific across all cultures. There's very particular way that the funerals happen and what happens pre-funeral, post-funeral, how long after that. Okay, so the simple way is that grief and grieving is your internal unique process. And mourning is the external manifestation of the cultural aspect of that
Right,
process.
right.
So some cultures wear white, some cultures wear black, some cultures immediately bury, others take longer.
Yeah. Like in Islam, we have a 7 days.
Correct.
In Christianity, they would have a 40 days. Things
Precisely.
like that.
And all cultures have those morning rituals, and they're all very carefully designed over hundreds of years to help the person cope.
Right. Yeah.
So they're not random things stuck in. These cultural things have long histories, and there's a particular reason that they are part of the morning ritual, is to help people cope. So we'll talk about denial just now, but that's really the difference. The grief, internal feeling, it's unique to you, and no two people grieve the same way.
Yeah, that was going to be my next point, question as well. Some people grieve a bit easier. I can't say how much easier, but why is it that people grieve differently? What is it that's in us, that's within us, that allows some people to, get over a loss of a loved one quicker than other people?
Sometimes it just looks like that. Sometimes it's not always like that. Some
May
people give the
differently.
external expression, okay. And just like a misconception. So people often think that when you cry a lot at a funeral that you are really feeling intense grief. Some people cannot shed a single tear and be feeling even more intense grief.
Yeah.
So I learned very early on not to use the intensity of crying as a measurement of how grieving you are.
Right.
And I've seen some people put onions in their eyes.
Sure.
Just before they go to a funeral. I'm not saying everybody does that.
Sure.
It's because they felt if I don't cry,
Yeah.
people are going to think that I'm really not feeling the loss.
And those that don't, for that matter, and you say, may internalize all these feelings,
Right.
and outwardly, if they don't express it sometimes, do you find that it lingers on a bit more?
No, that's the thing. So grief, there's a normal process, but a complicated grief could last for many years. And the problem with that is that it holds up your life in ways that you may not even have realized. So the first thing is that it's a unique process.
Okay.
Secondly, looking at somebody and seeing how much they're crying or how sad they look is not a measurement of how much they're grieving. Some people don't have time. They're going to organize a funeral, they're going to sort things out, they're going to park their grief. And they're going to maybe grieve at another time because there's so much to do.
Yeah.
So I have heard this, but I saw the person, they weren't really crying a lot. I stop and I say, you don't know what the person was feeling.
Of course.
You don't know what they had to do. And the person who was crying a lot, we don't know what that is either. I'm not saying that everybody that cries at the funeral is faking it, but I'm saying using it as a measurement of how intensely, and people, unfortunately, at all funerals I've been to across cultures, they look to see who's actually
crying the most.
That one is not doing anything.
Right.
Don't they love their dad?
Yeah.
So that's a bad marriage. So the listeners, if you do see, please don't do that. Don't look at other people and judge how the intensity of their grief simply because you're not seeing it.
Of course. So when someone comes to you as a clinical psychologist and not sure how to deal with the grief, not sure how to get over that challenge, not sure how to move on with their lives, because there's a ripple effect, because it's going to affect their immediate family, immediate surroundings, their work as well. Take us through a process or an example of how you dealt with a patient.
All right. I think one step before that is how do we get to this point? So firstly, there must be a loss.
Yeah.
Okay, somebody, a loved one, passes away. Now, the kind of loss also determines the kind of grief you're going to do. So there are many kinds of death. If you take, for example, personal story, my brother only had one sibling. He died in 2004 of colon cancer. And the doctors said to me, he will pass away in 3 months. He didn't. Alhamdulillah, he lived for 9 months. But I didn't accept that he was going to die. So I kept on believing, praying that he'll get better, he'll survive. In spite of the objective in front of me, all my friends were saying, it's getting worse, My response was, no, he's actually getting better.
Yeah.
So I convinced myself that he was going to get better.
Is that the denial?
That's the denial point about that. The denial of his illness in a way.
Yeah.
And then, so when he did pass on, and also after he passed, I mean, he would joke and he said, look, I've passed my 3-month sell-by date now, so every day is a blessing. But I thought, okay, like shot, he's made it, he's going to get better. He wasn't. And so when he finally did pass away, it still came as a shock, even though I should have prepared. Because the news was quite clear. Of course, doctors aren't always right.
Sure.
We know this, right?
Yeah.
But he was getting worse and worse, and my brain wasn't letting me see that, and I kept saying, he'll get better, he'll get better. So in a case like that, even though there was time to plan and prepare, I didn't do it.
Right.
I remained living in, I suppose, a not even useful hope. Because objectively, he was looking worse. He was very thin. Colon cancer is a big illness. You can't treat it generally sometimes if you catch it very late. When he died, his death came too soon. So that's one type. The other type is where people, they greet you in the morning, they go off, and then they get knocked by a bus.
Yeah.
And you get a phone call saying, sorry, so-and-so's died. Okay, so that's like a shock kind of death. Where
disbelief.
Where you didn't see that. And so what happens in the brain about that. The other kind of people going to hospital for very routine procedures. Something happens. And you get a call saying, we're really sorry, we were doing X procedure, it was a simple split, we don't know what happened, he passed on.
Right.
So then there's that kind of death. Then there's the other more gruesome ones, where people are murdered, and you find the bodies, you come home from work and you find the bodies. I'm not going to go into fine detail, but it's gruesome, it's shot, stabbed, strangled. And so your brain just downloads those images. Your brain doesn't have a choice. Okay, we'll talk another time about how your brain actually processes information. So that's another kind of death, or like a car accident. Often bodies are very mangled.
Of course.
And you crawl out of the car, and then you see your loved one lying in a very odd position. The brain downloads that. So then there's a traumatic kind of death as well.
Okay. If I can ask you just to hold on to that, we're going to reiterate that after the break. We're chatting to clinical psychologist Rafiq Lockhat around grief. And if you find the topic interesting or have a question, you're welcome to email me at Luqmaan@Hilaal.tv, and we'll pass those questions on to Brother Rafiq in the studio. Do stay tuned. We're going to take a break. We'll be back shortly. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Hilaal Live. Thanks for watching us on channel 347 on DSTV. It's Mental Health Mondays, and we have clinical psychologist Rafiq Lockhat in studio. Tonight's topic is the one of grief. If you'd like to be part of the program, if you'd like to correspond with us on the WhatsApp line, my apologies, on email. I'm so used to saying WhatsApp. On email, if you would like to send us an email if you have any questions, Luqmaan@Hilaal.tv, and we'll pose those questions to Brother Rafiq. Jazakallah once again, Brother Rafiq, for coming in and discussing such an important topic. And before the break, we chatted about the different types of grief and death, of death that people experience, especially with loved ones, people that are close to you. And I think maybe if you would like to reiterate some of those and the types that people deal with on a daily basis.
So we spoke about one where there's an expected death, somebody lets you know, but even in the case with me, I didn't accept that expectation date, and I lived in hope. So when he passed away, it came as a shock. I had to deal with that. It was very intense, very hard for me. I think I struggled for over a year with that. I had to get some help to fix it. So you can't fix things yourself always. Then, of course, there is the one, like the sudden one we said. Like you say, greet everybody, go off, knocked by a car, dead. Phone call, person's dead.
Yeah, I experienced that with a colleague a couple of years ago. We had a call. Her husband had said she was fine. By the afternoon, she had a brain tumor and she was gone.
So no preparation. And then the other one is, of course, where you're going for a routine operation, not a big one where the chances to say, look, it's 50-50. A routine operation, things go wrong, person passes away, you get a call, we're really sorry. You go, what? I don't understand. How can it be? Right. Then you get the gruesome ones.
Right.
Where people have either been murdered or they've been in a car accident or they've looked very bad. Right. So when those, and then maybe next week we can talk about stillbirths, miscarriages, because those are also losses.
Of course.
And often when I see client patients, I'll say to them, because particularly like stillbirths, the baby's generally been there for a while. So I say, did you give your baby a name? And And if they say yes, you already know there's a relationship been built up for however many months
Gotcha.
that the child was in there.
Yeah.
Okay, miscarriages, same, and abortions. Abortions happen. People do it, and that's also like the loss, but that's maybe for next week.
Right.
Right. So now your brain has to do something with that information. So if it's a gruesome passing away, for example, you come home and then you see like the blood everywhere, and some of this might be triggering for listeners, but we're talking mental health.
Right.
So if that happens, listeners should know that the brain is saying, I haven't fixed that yet. We spoke about anxiety. I said the same thing. If something triggers during our conversation, it's a good sign. It means there's something up with me. I haven't fixed this yet.
Right.
So in any of our conversations, our viewers may get triggered into thinking about stuff that has happened. That's not a bad thing.
Right.
That's part of what the show does. It's your brain saying to you, see, I haven't dealt with this yet.
Right. Right.
And now an opportunity exists to go and actually get help. I can say it because I didn't deal with my brother's death well at all.
Right.
Like 2004. I didn't deal with it well. I must have cried every day for him, basically. So, this is normal life.
Yes.
So now when something like that happens, your brain downloads what it sees. Okay, so let's say it's a car accident and there's limbs and bodies lying everywhere. Your brain's job is just to download information. That's what it does. It doesn't filter. It downloads what it sees. And unfortunately, once it downloads those gruesome types of images, it's then downloaded into the hard drive of your brain. Your brain turns it into a YouTube video, and it's there for life. And now that replays. Then you start avoiding any situation that may remind you of that.
Right.
Because unfortunately, the brain triggers. So now we're talking, the listener might be reminded of something they haven't dealt with, but opportunity. Then COVID came along.
I like that.
And COVID changed everything. Because people were dying for the first time by themselves.
Yeah.
And I mean, you might remember that time, no one knew what was going on. We were like hosing our groceries down, and so when people passed away in hospitals, often they just took them straight off. They didn't let family get a chance to see them because there were hospitals which was going on as well.
Because it affected the grieving and the mourning process.
Right, totally. So for the first time, many families lost loved ones without ever having said goodbye. Some fortunate ones were able to do video calls to them, people, like WhatsApp video calls, but a lot of people were already unconscious by then. And people were dying in really large numbers, including many medical doctors and dentists and nurses who were staff who worked there, the health workers. So that created a huge awareness around grief, okay, after that, because people were like, I don't know how to deal with this. Person went in, didn't see them again. In some countries, you don't even know where they were buried.
But that must have been very interesting in your field of expertise, because this was new for the world, but also how you would then approach when a client or a patient would come to you.
Right. So new for the world, not new to psychologists.
Okay. All right.
Psychologists knew that these kinds of losses exist, except the numbers were overwhelming.
Yes, right.
We were getting calls from all over the place. Right. Now, why did that happen? Because the brain needs closure. And when you have time, right, so you know somebody's passing away, the doctors call you, or you're at home, everybody's around the person, you're reciting, praying, there's time for you to do that closure. And so the pain of the loss is less, because your brain downloads some kind of closing act. When COVID happened, there was no closing act.
Sure.
It was, I got admitted, and then we didn't see the person again, gone. And sometimes in COVID, people lost people day after the next.
Sure.
So an uncle today, an auntie tomorrow, granny today, 3 days later, people just losing multiple. And so your brain only has so much capacity. We all have cell phones. Cell phones have X amount of memory. When that memory is full, you can't even take one more photograph because it's full. You know, they don't throw the phone away. You could update the memory or like delete some old videos to make space. And the brain can get like that. It gets overwhelmed because each loss is a separate loss.
Of course.
So imagine a file in the brain. And each person that passed away, so my father passed away today in the hospital, and then a week later my granny went. Separate file, but you haven't even started processing that file, and your brain's already downloading another loss. And then you're downloading another loss. So people just get really overwhelmed. And the thing is that the brain has to do something with the information. So I believe, and there's been lots written about it. There's a woman in 1969, Kubler-Ross Margaret, who wrote something called The Stages of Grief. It was good for the time. I think we've moved on to different things now. Understanding, and she tried to identify the stages that an average human being would go through.
Okay.
From the starting of the grief process to the end of the grief process.
Okay.
And when I worked at that amazing experience with Dr. George Savage, we were using some of those models. We kind of moved on. So her process, she says, the grief process ends when you get to the phase of acceptance.
Okay.
Right, meaning that
sense.
you accept the loss. I learned from working with Dr. Savage that there's one more stage that the textbooks don't talk about. And we call that readjustment, meaning adjusting to life without the person. That's often left out in many therapy programs. The aim is to take you from that intense pain where you're in and get you to the acceptance phase, and then therapy is done. It is not. That person, yes, we accepted the loss, but now you have to live in a world without that person. And that means enormous challenges. If you're suddenly a single parent, right? Let's say stereotypically the husband died, he took care of the finances, you don't know much about those things. Or either way around, you're the husband, you don't know much about raising the kids. I'm generalizing,
Gotcha.
Okay? So please, like, no hate mail about your stereotyping. We have to talk in generalizations. So it is the readjustment phase, meaning how do I adapt to life without my loved one? It's an important phase that previously has been left out of the academic and the clinical discussions, because we were guided by that 1969 textbook. That once you get to acceptance, you're okay. In my opinion, my work I do, no, you're not.
Right.
That's a great place to be.
Because the real work starts.
Really, because now the fear of how am I going to manage my life without this person? And it's a fear. It's a real fear. It doesn't mean that it can't be overcome.
And then it's the other forms of things like anxiety that can kick in.
Correct.
Correct. That can exacerbate a situation.
Right. So we will talk about, so is this for life? No. So there's something called, obviously, grief therapy.
Right.
And over the years, there's been different models, and I use a therapy called brain working recursive therapy.
Okay.
And we just call it in its nickname, the grief buster protocol, which really helps people to get through that really quickly. Because the longer you stay in a grief, in a, let's say, a stuck grieving state, the longer everybody else also suffers.
Okay.
Often I've had children as adults say to me, when my sister died, my parents just got lost. They just went into the shell and they never came out again. And I was like a lost person. So parents didn't do that on purpose.
Yeah.
They are immersed in the intensity of their loss. And so during that period, they don't realize there are other children that need, and I'm not saying this to make people feel guilty. That's not the aim of this at all. But I'm just saying these things happen. I was there, so I understand it. I got married a month after my brother died, and it was an intense period. I don't think that my focus was there. The grief was intense. So it happens to people as well. And often as adults, my patients will say, when so-and-so died, my mother or my father just went into a shell. They weren't there for us. And I tried to explain, it wasn't done on purpose.
Of course. It was just their way of
help wasn't available easily as there is now.
Absolutely.
So to say to people that the aim of the grief therapy is to remove the intense pain and bring it to normal sadness, which doesn't need treatment because it's normal.
Of course.
And that will heal with time.
Wow.
But you've got to get to that process.
Of course. Well, thank you so much for giving us valuable information around this very important topic. And we're going to continue with this next week. And I'm sure our viewers benefited from this immensely as well. So thank you very much. Have a great evening.
Always a pleasure.
And that's Rafiq Lockhat chatting to us, clinical psychologist Rafiq Lockhat, chatting to us about today's topic, which is grief. To join us next week as we continue with Mental Health Monday. From the Cape Town team, Sohail Barnes, Mohammed Parker, and myself, Luqmaan Shadrach. Have a great evening. Assalamu alaikum.